Hello, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. As you might have heard, the Supreme Court has weighed in on SB 1070, which is the law um, that Arizona tried to put forward to essentially make their own immigration law in contradiction to U.S. federal immigration policy. And first, the U.S. government sued them, and it went up to the U.S. District Court, and then later it went up to the Circuit Court of Appeal, and then finally it went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they have just issued their decision. Now, just so you know, Arizona was basically the first state to do this, and then afterwards, many other states followed. So as of today, there's about 6 states that have essentially made their own enforcement type immigration laws, many of which are essentially conduct racial profiling, essentially are unfair against immigrants, and they have certain procedures that are in violation of U.S. immigration law. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court has made a rule on the SB 1070, and there's different laws or different sections of SB 1070 that it made a ruling on. Basically, Section 3, which of SB 1070 made it a failure to comply with federal alien registration requirements a state misdemeanor. This was struck down in its entirety. The U.S. Supreme Court essentially said that federal immigration law preempts the states trying to regulate and to make their own immigration laws, essentially making a crime a criminal crime, whereas it's a civil penalty under federal law. So essentially enhancing and increasing U.S. immigration laws. Now, part of the policy of why the majority, and I'll get into some more in a minute here, but the majority of why SB 1070 was struck down is because when someone comes to the United States, regardless if they live in Arizona or not, they have to have some knowledge and some belief of how they're going to be treated, of what the uniform immigration laws are, and essentially also there's a reciprocal treatment for their people or for our people over in their country. And if places like Arizona, SB 1070, and all these other different ones that have come about make different enforcements and different immigration laws and different interpretations of those laws, then what's going to happen is they're not going to have faith that when they come to the U.S. that they have an expectation of what the laws are going to be. And by the same token, when our citizens, the U.S. citizens, go over to their country, we will not have that same reciprocal treatment over there. So it's really of a national uniform policy to keep the immigration laws federal, uniform, and in such a manner that people know what to expect. So the next section was Section 5C of SB 1070 in Arizona, and that made it a misdemeanor for an unauthorized alien to seek or engage in work in the state. And again, this was struck down in its totality. Basically, the Supreme Court was saying that, for example, someone who has a removal order in the U.S., there's no crime staying here, they can of course be deported. But what's happening with the laws, with this law in Arizona, is it tried to criminalize certain manners at the state level, which were not criminalized at the federal level. So the Congress has expressed very clear policy of what they want in immigration laws over the last 100 years, and they have put forward various immigration acts, IRCA, IRA, whatever it happens to be, and those are the comprehensive immigration policies for the United States. And when a state like Arizona tries to come in and usurp the authority of the federal government and making their own immigration policy, then this is what happens. I mean, it ends up going to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court strikes it down as basically saying that the federal law preempts the state law so that there is a uniform policy. Now, the next provision is Section 6 of SB 1070, which authorizes state and local officers to arrest without a warrant a person the officer has probable cause to believe has committed any public offense that makes the person removable from the United States. And this also was struck down in its entirety for the reasons that I've said above, and also for specific reasons that it listed in its opinion. But again, basically going to the crux of the situation here, that immigration law, there are reasons and there are purposes which maybe the federal government doesn't want to enforce certain areas. Maybe they want to take priority off of certain areas. For example, the John Morton memo from ICE regarding prosecutorial discretion basically listed a priority of whom they are going to target for deportation and removal proceedings, at which point SB 1070 specifically flew in the face of that policy. So there can't be one federal policy where they want to target certain people in certain areas, whereas the policy of Arizona is completely different and on its own. There was one provision that did withstand the U.S. Supreme Court's decision, Section 2B, which requires officers conducting a stop, detention, or arrest to make efforts in some circumstances to verify a person's immigration status with the federal government. Now, the reason that this was not struck down is not because they found it to be constitutional. It's because there has been no actual execution of this particular provision as of yet, because essentially there's been an injunction on it from the time it hit the district court level. So essentially what the decision says is they're going to see how the officials in Arizona handle and conduct themselves with this particular provision, and if it's done in a constitutional manner that is under the auspices of what is required for the United States Supreme Court, then it's fine. But otherwise, they have opened the door wide open for there to be certain other lawsuits and actions by the United States against Arizona if it is determined that they are abusing their power and not going in line with the decision of the U.S. Supreme Court. So, as you can see, there are, of the 4 provisions, 3 were completely struck down, and 1, the door was open to basically see what happens and if they comply. So, essentially, there is a problem with illegal immigration, and the U.S. Supreme Court did make acknowledgement of that. But the fact is that it really needs to be taken care of, not in the manner of which Arizona tried to do it, not in the manner which essentially trumps the right of the federal government to regulate immigration law, but in a manner that has comprehensive immigration reform by Congress that deals with both the enforcement issue and the affirmative applications and people being able to become residents, where it makes it so that a broken system or a system that's unfair against many is brought to light, brought to justice in such a manner that people on both sides of the aisle are happy, Otherwise, as we have seen, there's state after state after state that tries to regulate immigration on their own. And because of this decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, it does clear the way to at least know the federal government's the one that regulates immigration, not the states. Okay, more on the coming videos.